Hello everyone! Today's video is video number 8 in a series of teachings which can be best enjoyed when watched one after the other. Now, one quick disclaimer up front. In my last video I recommended a short clip by Rob Bell entitled "Everything is Spiritual." I do think the video gives the viewer some good food for thought when it comes to design and complexity of creation. There are, however, numerous aspects in the general worldview of the presenter of that video which I certainly do not hold to be true. My goal in this respect is simply to give you some resources that whet your appetite to dig deeper and to pursue the truth and nothing but the truth. Our two big questions in this video are, number one, why do evolutionists still hold on to their faulty worldview? And number two, what exactly is the agenda of that evolutionary worldview? Now, you know, the whole debate about creation versus evolution is often seen as purely academic, of secondary importance. My friend, this is not so. Everything about the Christian worldview depends on the truth of creation. It is either that creation is true or evolution is true. There is no in between. A born-again Christian cannot embrace both views. They mutually exclude each other. Let's go to the very first book of the Bible for a moment, to the very first verse, which says, quote, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth," unquote. Now, if you, as a born-again Christian, have a problem with this verse, I can assure you that you will have a problem with all of the book. Why? Well, because in that case, you have just cherry-picked which parts of the Bible you want to believe and which other parts you don't. Now, truth is non-negotiable. Where truth is, error cannot stay. It has to go. Now, most people are simply uninformed and have never made the effort to intellectually analyze the so-called theory of evolution. They have not thought about the implications of this worldview either. I fully agree with Jonathan Sarfati, who's got a PhD in chemistry, when he says, quote, "We are not asserting a conscious conspiracy or widespread deception. Rather, the worldview is so ingrained that most people don't even realize that it colors their interpretation. Very few evolutionists realize it," unquote. Now, let me illustrate this problem with the data from a 2014 opinion poll Gallup took in the US. Quote, "Half of Americans believe humans evolved, with the majority of these saying God guided the evolutionary process," unquote. So half of the Americans think that believing in God is compatible with evolution. Well, let's test this for a moment. Now, if God used evolution as his vehicle to create man, why did he not create him right from the start? There would have been much less bloodshed and unnecessary death then. So, if you logically follow the idea that God guided the evolutionary process, God must be either very cruel or incompetent to create a human from scratch. My point is that as a born-again Christian, you cannot have the cake and eat it. That is, to believe in evolutionism and God at the same time. Now, if you try to, you end up believing in a God that is not the God of the Bible. Now, for further illustration, let me give you the example of a famous man who said he believed in God but ended up creating his own God, which was nothing more than the figment of his own imagination. I'm talking about Thomas Jefferson. Yes, one of the so-called founding fathers of America and the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. He also served as America's third president from 1801 to 1809. Now, Jefferson took the Bible and he used razors. Razors. Can you imagine that? Razors. To cut out passages from a total of 6 Bible volumes. He then pasted them into a personal book to create his own Bible. In 1820, he finished his work, which was eventually published in 1904, almost 80 years after his death. Apparently, a number of people still like the idea of an improved, cleaned up Bible. Why else would a publisher make the effort to issue a new Thomas Jefferson edition just a few years ago? Now, some born-again Christians might feel uncomfortable with the fact that their worldview is in conflict with what is generally taught at school and propagated in the media. That is evolutionism, and therefore choose to compromise on their belief so as to not make waves. To these Christians, I simply say, please do your homework and research matters yourself, so that you can also discover why evolutionism and creationism are not compatible. The last couple of videos I produced will certainly be of great value in that quest for truth. So for a born-again believer in Jesus, to hold on to evolutionism parallels the efforts of Jefferson to cut and paste the content of the Bible. One simply takes out what he is uncomfortable with, and the result of taking away from the truth is changed altogether. So share the truth about evolutionism richly. This is no small matter. Have a look at this piece of Swiss cheese. This is what the so-called theory of evolution looks like when put under the truth filters I introduced you to in one of my initial videos. You see, there is no logical consistency. There is no empirical adequacy. Instead, just like this Swiss cheese, it is full of holes, which cannot be patched up. So, my friend, for Swiss cheese, this seems to be okay, but not for a worldview that you bank your life on, even your afterlife. So, my friend, present the evidence to your uninformed colleagues or friends, family members, and challenge them with the facts. Did you know that there are evolutionists that try to bridge the gap to Christianity, or religion in general? They literally stretch forth their hands and say religion and evolution, they don't really need to be at enmity anymore. In a recent publication, a naturalist himself invited the world's leading evolutionary thinkers to express their views on key questions pertaining to religion, creation, etc. Perhaps surprisingly, the majority of them stated that, quote, religion is a social phenomenon that has developed with the biological evolution of Homo sapiens. Therefore, religion should be considered as a part of our biological heritage and its tenets should be seen as a labile social adaptation, subject to change and reinterpretation, unquote. Now, what this means in essence is this. A great number of evolutionists simply view religion as the product of our socio-biological evolution. The issue is no longer God himself, but simply a religious system. Such a system can certainly also be improved and updated or upgraded, depending on the evolution of mankind in general. Wow! As an avowed Christian, I must strongly object to such reasoning and warn fellow believers of this very subtle approach of establishing yet another beachhead to more efficiently attack Christianity. What seems as a concession on the part of evolutionists at first glance turns out to be an invitation to further compromise on the central teachings of Christianity. To say it quite clearly, Christianity is not a religious system, but a worldview based on a personal relationship with the unchanging Creator God. My friend, it is absolutely mandatory, therefore, that we can teach others about the devastating worldview of evolutionism. That is, its flaws and also consequences for us and those that believe it is the truth, even in its most user-friendly form of trying to simply swallow up our belief by saying that, well, religion is just a part of evolution. So let's now focus on our main question today. Why do hardcore evolutionists still hold on to their faulty worldview? Without a doubt, they know that things don't add up, but they nevertheless present it as truth, the only truth. As you will see from the quotes that follow, evolutionists defend their worldview at all costs and regardless of any evidence presented to the contrary. Why? Because they don't want to receive the truth. Please meet Michael Ruse, an influential professor of philosophy and science at Florida State University. He writes, quote, "Evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science. Evolution is promulgated as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity, with meaning and morality. I am an ardent evolutionist and an ex-Christian, but I must admit, evolution is a religion. This was true of evolution in the beginning, and it is true of evolution still today. It gives you a world picture that some people, starting with me, find entirely satisfying. I can't answer all of the questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? How does the conscious mind arise from the physical brain? Is there a purpose to it all? But I am not sure that anyone can answer these questions in a satisfactory manner, and I certainly don't go to bed worrying about them." Unquote. Well, Professor Ruse chooses this worldview because it's entirely satisfying to him, although he admits that it doesn't answer such fundamental questions as how does the conscious mind arise from the physical brain. Remember the Swiss cheese analogy? No matter the fact that the answers to the big questions are missing, and when supplied, lead to a complete breakdown of the so-called theory of evolution. Ruse still goes to bed not worrying about them. Now, what kind of science is this? The most fundamental questions are deliberately overlooked, put aside, because the selected worldview is satisfying. Oh, entirely satisfying. My friend, if a scientist purposefully discards evidence, no, doesn't even worry about asking some tough questions that could potentially challenge his worldview, then once again we must state that evolutionism is anything but science. This new religion is marketed and presented as the only truth there is. One of its chief proponents, of course, is Richard Dawkins, whose ideas you have already met in previous videos. Now, he made it abundantly clear that, quote, "We are machines built by DNA whose purpose is to make more copies of the same DNA. That is exactly what we are here for," unquote. So for the individual, there is no purpose involved. Life is meaningless, which happens to exactly fit what evolutionists want life to be. Listen to Aldous Huxley, famous author and atheist. Quote, "I had motives for not wanting the world to have a meaning, and consequently assumed that it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find satisfying reasons for this assumption. For myself, as no doubt for most of my friends, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. The supporters of this system claimed that it embodied this meaning, the Christian meaning, they insisted, of the world. There was one admirably simple method of confuting these people and justifying ourselves and our erotic revolt. We would deny that the world had any meaning whatever," unquote. As you can see, Aldous Huxley chose to believe that life is meaningless and embraced evolutionism wholeheartedly. Why? Because he rejected the Christian system of morality. His choice had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with facts, but simply with his own desires. As he himself admitted in the same source, even more clearly, quote, "A meaningless world frees me to my own erotic and political pursuits," unquote. To sum up then, evolutionism has nothing to do with science. It is a religion by the admission of its informed followers. The one worldview that evolutionism primarily opposes is Christianity's stifling morality, where somebody called God calls the shots and tells his creation what can or cannot be done. As a result, evolutionism explicitly takes aim at the Christian worldview and goes to great length to openly attack this other worldview by discrediting, slandering, and ridiculing it. We have now crystallized the answer to our main question, which is, why do evolutionists still hold on to their faulty worldview? Because they want to liberate themselves from Christianity, its system of morality, and pursue their own personal and, as I will thoroughly demonstrate, political agenda. Let me stress once again, my friend, that the vast majority of people are simply not familiar with the nature and scope of this debate. They readily accept evolutionism the way it is presented to them, as proven scientific fact. Now, obviously, the spin doctors of evolutionism have done a pretty good job in indoctrination. Now, in one of my videos, I have already introduced you to Professor Thomas Nagel. He's an atheist professor of philosophy and law at New York University. He is, at least academically, honest enough to seriously doubt evolutionism and to openly admit why he's against a world in which God is acknowledged and seen as creator. Quote, "I want atheism to be true and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. it isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that." Unquote. Now, let us move on to our second question for today. What is the agenda of this evolutionary worldview? Well, for this it is interesting to go back to Darwin and his book on the origin of species. Again, a disclaimer has to be made up front. Evolutionism did not originate with Darwin. He popularized it more than anyone else. That's why we mainly deal with him in the context of evolutionism. Please take note also that the very name of Darwin has survived in countless publications up to our time. This can be seen, for example, in the emergence of the term neo-Darwinism, which was first used by August Weismann, a German naturalist, in the 1880s. Interestingly, quote, "Weizmann was an ardent Darwinian, one who never relinquished his faith in Darwinian evolution and natural selection," unquote. Isn't that interesting? The author of the piece on Weizmann uses the word faith in connection with Darwinian evolution. Quite telling indeed. Darwin's role in the advancement of evolutionism cannot be overstated. Professor Roos puts it this way, quote, "Had Darwin and Wallace never existed, scientists would still have become evolutionists, but it was Darwin who precipitated and expedited the change," unquote. Speaking of Professor Roos, in the source I mentioned earlier, he neatly summarizes some of the key developments that have taken place ever since Charles Darwin's book on the origin of species was published. Quote, "At the time of Darwin himself, his great defender, Thomas Henry Huxley, grandfather of the novelist Aldous Huxley, set out consciously to make of Darwinism a phenomenon that not only substituted for religion, but that gave the same emotional satisfactions of religion. Like those who were to follow, Huxley did not see the world, as would I and Dawkins, as blind and meaningless, but rather as something with a direction upwards, as evolution led progressively to our species. Huxley gave what he himself called lay sermons, and he worked hard to promote his world vision. In one of the most interesting moves, he and fellow workers even set about building churches, cathedrals, to their new religion, except they called them museums of natural history. These were places where, instead of going to a Christian cathedral on a Sunday morning, a family could go on a Sunday afternoon and see magnificent panoramas of past life. All of those fossil dinosaurs being dug up in the American West and shipped east for all to see and admire. On the principle that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, natural history museum after museum was built in the style of a Gothic cathedral or earlier. Gaze at the Norman architecture of the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and you could be in Durham, England. As it happens, towards the end of his life, Thomas Henry Huxley began to doubt the worth of his philosophy. He did not return to God, but he began to doubt that evolution had all of the answers. But this has not stopped his successors, starting with another grandson, Julian Huxley. This younger Huxley even wrote a book called Religion Without Revelation, where he saw Darwinian evolution working progressively up to our species, and where he saw nature itself giving directives about proper action to preserve and help mankind. Today, the world's most distinguished Darwinian, Edward O. Wilson of Harvard University, likewise thinks that evolution progresses up to humans and speaks of his world picture as a myth that must replace conventional religions. Unquote. Now, this brief overview greatly helps us distill the answer to the second question of today's video. What is the agenda of this evolutionary worldview? The shortest answer to this question is replacement. I hope that everyone listening today will agree with me that as a born-again believer, we cannot sit idle and just watch as evolutionism continues to replace the Christian faith. Make no mistake, it has happened to a large extent already. A lot of territory has been lost by now. Why? Because people like you and I have not taken the matter seriously enough to investigate it and eventually to rock the boat, crying foul! That's why every video comes with a strong appeal to action, which of course starts with getting trained in defending our faith and exposing evolutionism for what it is. The whole thing, reminds me of a song by Keith Green entitled How I Love You. In it, Keith sings to God Almighty, quote, I was lied to, but you told the truth, 'cause you are the truth. I was lied to, but you showed the truth to me, unquote. Many people have been lied to, and they have passively accepted the lie of evolutionism without ever questioning it. I was one of them who swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker, believing it and buying into it wholesale and uncritically. What about you, my friend? What about you, my friend? Are you one of them that has overlooked the fact that evolutionism and Christianity make the strangest bedfellows? I urge you to repent of it and to share the truth with those around you. Now, in my next video, I'm going to go into greater detail on the consequences of the evolutionary agenda. For now, I will close by drawing your attention to one particular detail of what I just quoted. Professor Roos said, there are evolutionists who simply see the world as blind and meaningless, while others regard it as something that has an upward direction. Now, an upward direction? What upward direction? The following extract from a Christian magazine shows us the ugly side of this upward direction. Quote, in reality, Darwin's writings, when actually read, express the prevalent racism of the 19th century and endorse an extreme laissez-faire political ideology that legitimates the neglect of the suffering poor by the ruling elite. Those who argue at school board meetings that Darwin should be taught in public schools seldom have taken the time to read what he had to say, if they even knew the full title of his book, which is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Well, they might have gained some inkling of the racism propagated by this controversial theorist. Then, if they had gone on to read his second book, The Descent of Man, it is likely that they would be shocked to learn that among Darwin's scientifically based proposals was the elimination of the Negro and Australian peoples, which he considered to be savage races whose continued survival was hindering the progress of civilization. In The Descent of Man, 1871, Darwin went so far as to rank races in terms of what he believed was their nearness and likeness to gorillas. He further proposed the extermination of those races which he scientifically defined as inferior. To not do so, he claimed, would result in those races which have much higher birth rates than his designated superior races, exhausting the resources needed for the survival of better people and eventually dragging down all of civilization. Darwin even argued against advanced societies wasting time and money on caring for those who are insane or suffer from birth defects. To him, these unfit members of our species ought not to survive. In case you think that Darwin sounds like a Nazi, you are not far from the truth. Konrad Lorenz, a biologist who provided much of the propaganda for the Nazi Party, made Darwin's theories the basis for his polemics. The Pulitzer Prize winner Marilynne Robinson, in her insightful essay on Darwin, points out that the German nationalist writer Heinrich von Treitschke and the biologist Ernst Haeckel also drew on Darwin's writings as they helped Hitler develop those racist ideas that led to the Holocaust. Unquote. The author of this article goes on to warn us of the ethical consequences and implications of Darwinism. Evolutionism, as propagated by Darwin and others, to some extent paved the way to some of the most horrific atrocities humans have ever committed against each other. Rejecting evolutionism is not only justified on scientific, but also historical, ethical, and theological grounds. Join me again next week for more.